I was a virgin until I was 36, and then I got a surrogate partner. The more I looked at porn and the more deeply I got into those fantasies, the fantasy of porn became my reality, and the reality of having sex with another person became fantasy.
Welcome to the Secret Life Podcast. Tell me your secret. I'll tell you mine. Sometimes you have to go through the darkness to
So
reach
I was
the
a
light.
virgin until
That's what I
36,
did.
and then I got
After
a
12
surrogate
years
partner.
of recovery in sex and love addiction, I finally found my soulmate, myself. Please join me in my novel, Secret Life of a Hollywood Sex and Love Addict, a 4-time bestseller on Amazon. It's a brutal, honest, raw, gnarly ride, but hilarious at the same time. Check it out now on Amazon. Welcome to Secret Life Podcast. I'm Brianne Davis-Gant. Today, I'm pulling back the curtains of all kinds of human secrets. We're going to hear about what people are hiding from themselves or others. You know those deep, dark secrets you probably want to take to your grave? Or those lighter or funnier secrets that are just plain embarrassing? Really, the how, what, when, where, and why of it all. Today, my guest is Joe. Now, Joe, I have a question for you. Dun, dun, dun. What is your secret?
My secret is I was a virgin until I was 36.
You were?
Yeah.
How old are you right now?
Still 36. This was a couple months ago. It's very new.
Wow, it's so new. Oh my God. Thank you for coming on and sharing that. I am so excited to talk to you. Can we go back? What was your relationship with sex growing up?
So speaking of sex as as solo play, as an individual, it was not very healthy. I did get addicted to porn at 14 or 15.
Yeah.
And that was like my reality with sex. One of the things I've realized in recovery as I've moved forward is that the more I looked at porn and the more deeply I got into those fantasies, the fantasy of porn became my reality, and the reality of having sex with another person became fantasy. And it got more and more distant over time. And my ability to be intimate with someone else became weaker and weaker the more I looked at that. And so that started when I was 15, and I did not get recovery from that until I started working my recovery program at 32.
Wow. That is so true. I saw images way too young as well. I think I saw images at 5 years old. I talk about that. I, at a very young age, masturbated, was in fantasy, latchkey kid, seeing movies way too sexual. And it's so crazy how it taints your intimacy with other people and yourself. So especially young boys right now. I just talked to a woman that the porn is making an epidemic where young boys cannot connect at all their sexuality to reality.
Absolutely. I remember I was watching a TED Talk on that, and he said, the guy doing it, he said, we can't do studies on pornography because in order to do a study, we have to have a control. And we could not find any young boys of like their age range they're looking for that had not looked at pornography. Okay. That's how ubiquitous it is. Yeah.
That's terrifying. I have a 4-year-old son, just so you know, I'm terrified of that, honestly, because, the recovery we do, we see that that's one of the elements that makes intimacy so difficult. So when you kept feeling yourself becoming distant and more distant, when was it really apparent that it was like stopping you from stepping into this next level of connection?
I wasn't aware at the time. That's the thing. Awareness comes later when you're recovering from an addiction. And like for me, when I was younger, it was actually the first program I went into for recovery was around food, because I would massively binge food and got into a huge weight. And then I started recovery in that. And that was another way to get away from my feelings. And when I stopped doing that, that's when those issues around sex and love started to become more apparent. And because I didn't have that other thing to numb, that became the thing to numb. And so, yeah, it wasn't until I moved out on my own. I identify as a sexual and romantic anorexic. So I compulsively avoid those activities. And so if anyone would come anywhere near me with interest, I would run in the other direction or pretend I didn't understand that they were interested, or would just be too unaware to really even recognize that they were. So when I moved out on my own, I was a little after 30, I think. I couldn't move the goalposts anymore, or I tried to, and it was too painful.
What do you mean it was too painful and the goalposts? What do you mean by that?
Well, I kept giving myself these what seemed like very rational excuses why I wasn't dating. So like, oh, I'm not ready yet. Oh, I need to move out on my own. Oh, I'll do it next year. People would ask me that, like, oh, when are you going to start? And they tried to set me up with people, and I would just kind of smile and nod, but I wouldn't really engage with that person. And eventually they stopped. My friends stopped asking, or they're like, well, I don't know what's going on, but and so like I would make up these excuses. So first it was when I lose weight, because I had an eating disorder.
Yes, that's a big one. People say,
yeah,
when I lose that 10 pounds, when I lose that weight, I'll go and start dating.
Exactly. And then it was, well, I have to live on my own. And then I lived on my own, and I didn't have any more goalposts. So I started to go nuts, and I had a binge episode where I compulsively masturbated.
What do you mean compulsively? How much? I felt
a uncontrollable urge to masturbate as a way, and it was a way to self-soothe.
Yes.
And when I would binge, it would be in a public place, so a bathroom stall, or I would park into a very like secluded, dark street where no one could see me. I'd pull the seat back all the way down, cover the windows, and like I never knew why I did that. And it wasn't until I went to therapy later that he said, "I think you're trying to connect to people sexually, but didn't know how to. It's like you were sick."
Wow. So you were even taking it out in public to actually feel a connection to other people.
Right. And that started, that stopped when I started working my food program. And I thought, oh, that's just the craziness of starting a program.
Right.
But then 4 years later, I wanted to ask this woman out.
Yeah.
And I was psyching myself up to do it. And then when the opportunity came, I denied myself that. And
how did you do that? Did you like walk up to her and then just turn the other way?
I didn't even walk up to her. I was just standing like near her, and I was going to say something, and then I just didn't say anything.
Wow.
And on an internal level, it was like the final, like I deprived myself in such a, like, from if someone were looking at me, they wouldn't know anything. But internally, like I was depriving myself for the last time. It was like the last straw. And I was going to a movie with some friends, and I had to stop on the way, and I just found a street and did it again. And then that was when it took me a couple months to really own that I did that and not like pretend I didn't, because I would forget the next day. As an addict, we forget.
Yeah.
And then I went to this event for another program, and there was someone who was in my now recovery program around this stuff, the sex and love stuff. And he told me something that I needed to hear. And then I went in the next day. And
can you share what he told you?
We just had a long conversation, and it was just like talking about how, like, porn just kind of, it takes us away from ourselves.
Right. And,
obviously what I was doing in public was a crime and could have been arrested for it. Could have been on my record. I could have been a sex offender. And like, I'm still very grateful that, my spiritual power prevented that from happening. But it gave me a new insight into, those types of behaviors and people who do those types of behaviors, that it tends to be more of a sickness than like an inherent evil,
like a
person.
Perversion. It's more of a sickness, and it's more of an emptiness that they have not looked at than a perversion, or like trying to hurt someone else. Right.
Exactly.
Great.
And so I came in and started working on myself. And really what it was is I thought I came in to try to fix myself. I'm going to fix myself. And what actually ended up happening is I learned to love myself, which I think is the point of a recovery program.
You just didn't know how to have intimacy, and the things you saw at such a young age disconnected you.
And it took me a lot longer to really find, because I was like, there are other anorexics. I met many in my program over the years, but none of them were virgins at my age.
Right.
And so I felt very alone and separated by that. And I was like, what is the answer? What is the answer? It's just banging in my head. Why am I like this? Why this specifically? And it wasn't until last year that I got my answer. My mother is an addict. when I was younger, before she got into recovery, a little bit of recovery. She left the program, but she did get some recovery. Long story short, she was horrifically abused by my grandfather, who I never met.
Oh.
And my theory, and not trying to take her inventory, but is that she had a lot of fear and hatred around men and especially male sexuality. She demonized male sexuality in the household. Men were predators. That's all they could be. That's all they could do. They were rapists. And like, that's all I heard in my childhood growing up. And combine that with my mom would have rages where she would shriek at me and my dad over tiny things that I can't even remember what it was about anymore. And I just never felt emotionally safe. And so what I learned, what that programming taught me was women hate me.
Right.
I'm inherently bad, evil, and disgusting. But most importantly, I thought that if I were sexual, and this was deep subconscious emotional stuff, it wasn't intellectual, but thought if I was sexual with a woman, that was the same thing as me assaulting her.
Oh, so because your mom had such a negative view with her past and she didn't deal with her trauma, then her view on men stuck in your head. So if you leaned into your sexuality, then that would make you horrible, like your mom said.
A predator.
Right.
Yeah, like a Bill Cosby or something like that. So all those 20 plus years of being an anorexic and hiding from that, I thought I was protecting women from me. That's something I've heard talked about in psychological circles of boys being treated like criminals based on past male experiences that people have had, men and women. They treat the boys that way as if they're already like that. And then they believe they're like that and they grow up acting like that. And we create our own monsters in that way. But yeah, so I knew that answer. A friend of mine said, look, if you need that answer to heal, that will be revealed to you. Like your higher power will reveal that to you. And if not, it won't. And it was. And what I did not realize is by not having those experiences, I was denying other people my emotional, romantic, and sexual nourishment. And that I could have been of service that way. Yeah. I made choices to stay alone. I was making conscious choices, but I was also powerless over my fear and my trauma. And I needed to work a specific type of therapy in order to get past that fear of intimacy.
Yeah, because intimacy is terrifying. It's so utterly terrifying, and I also, it's just terrifying to put yourself out there, your willingness to be abandoned, rejected, not know what you're doing, awkward, all of it. It's terrifying having intimacy with another person. It's so much easier doing it alone, but then that's not true intimacy.
You're giving someone else the power to really hurt you emotionally. Yeah. If they were, whether they do it on purpose or not. And then for those of us who've had trauma in that area is so sensitive, much more sensitive than other people. And so we can get almost destroyed, unhinged by a breakup or something or someone cheating on us. So then it's like, okay, tools of the program, self-care, therapy, help me stay, balanced, help me get through this. Because those feelings will really lie to you and they'll tell you you're alone and no one likes you. And the things I have said to myself in my head.
There's something wrong with you. Yeah.
Oh, God, I'm broken. This is pointless. I shouldn't even be trying to do this.
Especially with what society puts on men more than women, that they need to conquer. They need to be sleeping around, Right. If a woman sleeps around, we're whores, we're, sluts. But then you're not doing it. You're going the opposite way. It's even more stigma put on you. Is that how it felt?
I think I felt a lot of shame over not having had sex. And when those conversations would come up amongst men, I had nothing to say, I'd smile and nod, or I'd repeat something someone else said, or occasionally I think I would lie and pretend I'd had sex because I knew that was not a safe place, because most men are still very unactualized and infantilized and not emotionally available. So I had a lot of female friends, but I couldn't talk to them about that. I never felt safe enough to talk to them about that kind of stuff. It wasn't until I came into my recovery program, I found women who were comfortable talking about that stuff. And we actually, both of us got a lot of healing. We're talking about our sexual fears and issues and stuff like that. And it was like breaking through that other patriarchal thing of men and women are separate. They don't cross the lines. They don't talk to this stuff with each other, when in reality, we all really need to.
Yeah. we really need to. That's why I started the podcast. We really need help, because what the messages that are sent to us and ourselves and trauma and everything else is so debilitating. And that's where you were stuck and debilitated in your own sexuality.
Oh yeah. And it's such an intimate part of ourselves that it's like a foundational piece of who we are. And if that foundation isn't stable, like we're never finding that stability in our lives until that starts to heal.
Yeah.
And that for me, like the biggest piece of the puzzle came into place this year around the work that I've done.
Which I want to talk about so much. So what is the work you have done to get to the other side of it? I love the big breath. I love the big breath.
So I was dating what in our program, I have like a structure that was created to help me feel safe. And I remember when I started dating, I had no idea. I actually, by the miracle, I had worked to a place where I found myself handsome. But
I love that.
I did. I thought I was attractive, but I'm like, do women find that? I have no idea. And I remember my sponsor said, I don't want you to go on more than 3 dates a week because it'll be too overwhelming otherwise. And I actually got mad at him. I thought he was making fun of me. I'm like, I'm not going to get 3 dates a week. That's way too many dates. It's crazy. I thought it would be dating for a month or more before I got a date. And I went on the infamous apps, that are out there. Yes. And I remember within 4 days I had a date and I was getting 2 to 3 dates every week. And I was stunned. I remember crying a lot, because I did not realize that that's how I was seen. And it wasn't about needing validation from someone else. It was about being affirmed that I'm worthy of these things. So I dated for a while, and there was a woman, and we went back to my place and we were being physical with each other, but I couldn't move forward. Like I didn't know what to do. I felt anxious. Yeah. And that didn't work out for other reasons. But what I remembered was focusing on just like the fear that came up for me of not knowing what to do. Right. And I remember telling myself, I'm going to do moment to moment consent because that's what we do. And, I've done research on it and gone to a class about that. And like, okay, that sounds good. But when I actually got into the class, I was so terrified. I didn't know what to say or do. And I had this fear if I said the wrong thing, I would ruin it. Yeah. And so I took a break because of some family stuff. I had to take care of my parents from dating. And then I talked to my sponsor and he said, why don't you try surrogate partner therapy? Yes. And I was like, I've heard this term, but I don't know what it is. And so I didn't know how to go about it. So I went into my recovery program and I made an announcement. I said, hey, I'm looking for this type of therapy. If anyone knows a place where I can find that. And a fellow, it's a Zoom time, this is COVID time, messaged me the place. I went there, I got a therapist, I told him what was going on. And before the end of the session, it's like, oh yeah, that's something that you need. Like he did. He was like, yes, let's exactly it.
But it's true because sometimes you need a professional to get past those trauma barriers, right?
Oh yeah.
Because I even had a client and somebody I was working with go use one of those cuddlers. Just like to have that warmth and intimacy, but not make it sexual.
Right. Exactly.
It's different, but it's still the same. It's where fear of intimacy. But in your case, it was like your trauma and your anxiety was stopping you from moving past that barrier. So you needed a professional.
I did. I needed someone who had no expectations, unlimited patience, and could run the show, could run everything. Right. Especially as a man, I felt that pressure to have to initiate and to be in charge and to take charge of everything. And that was overwhelming for me. Yeah. And I needed someone to walk me through the process. So he found me a surrogate through an organization that certifies surrogates. It's an international one in LA. I met up with this person. And I remember the first thing I noticed when she logged into the Zoom, again, no vaccinations yet. We're trying to stay safe. If I had seen her out on the street, I would have walked into a lamppost. I had never been more attracted to someone physically. And that was a big deal for me because most men, they overfocus on the physical. Yeah. For me, like I did not give myself permission to date women I was physically attracted to, which was also holding me back from dating because I was not really, it's like, well, this is not going to go anywhere because I'm not attracted to them in that way. And it's another anorexic way of not.
Yes. Picking someone you're really not attracted to. So you didn't even have to put that on.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So I was like, wow, she's really, and I was so intimidated. I remember the first thought was she's really attractive. The second thought was, I don't deserve to be with someone like this.
Right.
And so I started to become aware of how low I had graduated from self-hatred to low self-esteem, but I had ways to go.
You had ways to go, but at least you graduated to something.
Yes.
Not as horrible.
I was in the blacks, just barely. I'd gone from deep in the red to in the black.
Well, good job on that moment.
Yes. And so I remember writing that down, talk to my therapist about this thought. But when we started talking to each other, there was intellectual attraction and emotional attraction. And I played it cool because she's like, well, if you want to work, I said, yeah, let me chat with my therapist and we'll get back to you. And she logged out. I just turned in and went, yep, now let's do it. Let's do this. But yeah, I remember the one thing she said, what are your goals? And this was one of the scariest things I've ever done is I said, I want to experience sex. That's what I said.
Okay.
And she said, well, that's not guaranteed. I said, oh, no, of course, I understand. You can't guarantee that. But she was willing to be sexual and that's where this therapy is much different from other therapy because there has to be mutual, authentic attraction between the client and the surrogate for it to work. Otherwise, she would have said, this is as far as I'm comfortable going with you. I hope you find another surrogate and all that stuff.
Wow. I know people are thinking this, and I'm going to ask this question, and you do not have to answer.
Sure.
But why instead of going that route, which I think is much healthier and amazing, but why didn't you just go get a prostitute?
I am a sex positive person and I really respect sex workers. I think we should, unionize and make it legal and all that. But for me, going to that person feels like, and this is just my second wave sex negative feminist upbringing, perhaps, that it's immoral of me to do that.
Got it.
That's my own personal thing. But also it would have had no intimacy whatsoever.
Yeah.
Probably. And so that would not have helped me grow because I need that intimate connection. I need that safety and trust and someone who's trained in therapeutic stuff because I had issues to work through.
Yeah.
I did consider going to a sex worker many times over the years, but something stayed my hand. And so by the time I got into to do it now in the program, that is just something that programs that's not going to be of service to you and your issues in doing it that way.
Thank you for answering that. Because I just think it's important that people hear the reasoning because the work you did with this professional is going to benefit you so much more than just, I just got to have sex so I can have sex, and get past that hurdle. So I just needed to ask that. So thank you for answering.
Of course. Yeah. And what I learned is surrogates, it's legal in all 50 states. It's not sex work because the sex is a mutually agreed upon thing that happens later in the process. What you're paying for is the therapeutic exercises that she and I did together.
So the first session, were you uncomfortable? I know you didn't get into the sex, but it had to be uncomfortable.
I was nervous. So the first time that we actually touched, I remember that was the second session.
Okay.
And I remember she said, we're going to do a hand caress. So we're just going to touch each other's hands. Very simple sensate thing. And she said, do you want to go first? I said, yeah. She said, okay, touch my hand in a way that brings you pleasure. And I could not conceive of that. I didn't know. Intellectually, I understood what she meant, but I didn't know how to go about that because I was not fluent in the language of touch. There was not a lot of touch in my childhood. And the more that my disease is a progressive disease, so the more my anorexia got stronger, the less I wanted to touch others in any way because I felt like somehow that was hurting them or being weird or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I remember I touched her hand and I just kind of touched it kind of mechanically. I didn't know how to find pleasure that way. Yeah. It's something I never thought about. And so I did the best that I could with that. And then she touched my hand and everything shifted. I remember literally feeling like I was being filled up. And I felt an empty place inside of me filling. And then I felt full, but I could still have unlimited more touch. It wouldn't be uncomfortable. And I remember I actually did get very sexually aroused by just having my hand touched. And it's like there was just that part of me that had never had that stimulation, was like awakening.
Yeah. Never been that ignited, like a switch.
Exactly. And she was even surprised. She's like, yeah, you had a strong reaction to that. You're very sensitive. I said, yeah. And so we continued doing touch exercises like that, moving forward. And she would say things to me that were neutral statements, but were, to me, amazing compliments. Like, we did one where we touched each other's faces. We take turns, and we put each other's heads in our laps. So I put my head in her lap, and then we switched. And when she put her head in mine and I touched her face, I never got her to admit it. I'm pretty sure she fell asleep. I'm pretty sure. And I remember sitting there with her head in my lap in this office and just being like, what is happening right now? Like, we were so comfortable. It was so calm and peaceful. And like that programming of like, you're going to hurt someone, or it's going to be the same, like that wasn't happening. And I remember I talked to her about it later, and she said, yeah, I feel really safe with you.
Oh, I bet that was, I'm going to start crying right now. I bet that was so healing for you.
I went home and cried a lot.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, I'm not a predator. I'm not, that's all wrong. Like that emotional work started to shift.
So beautiful.
There were so many fears that came up that I couldn't even articulate, that would come up and then would be immediately neutralized. I had so many fears built up over the years around physical intimacy and things, half remembered ideas from childhood or bad romantic comedies, or like all this really unhealthy, inaccurate, like ideas of what it would be like.
Yeah.
And so that shifted in the reality of what it was. There were two things. There was the excitement of the reality being much better than the fantasy or the fear.
Right.
But then there were times when, because it didn't exactly adhere to this fantasy idea I had, like I would feel let down initially.
Yeah.
But once I really stayed present to the moment and enjoyed it, I realized, oh, this is much better. And it doesn't have to be the same way every time. And like all that stuff I want, I can either get through this process, or I will have that experience in the future if I'm meant to with someone else.
I have to tell you, Joe, like I'm so uncomfortable right now that because I have that anorexia too. And I've talked about this before, but even you like touching the face and images of like coming up for you of things you saw in the past or what it should look like, our feelings. And I'm literally feel like I'm going through it with you right now. Like I'm like so uncomfortable because it's terrifying, and I feel that, and I want to cry at the same time. So I just wanted to let you know I feel the exact same way right now.
Thank you for reminding me I'm not alone.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that with me.
So how long till it went down? Like how long did it take until the
sexual encounter?
Yes, thank you. Okay. Thank you.
So yeah, that because that was never guaranteed, the way to get through it is I had to just take each session as it came and forget about previous sessions and not think about future ones.
Right.
And just take it one session at a time.
You mean just be in the moment with someone?
Be in the moment and not, I remember at one point she said like, thank you for not pushing the sexual thing. And I remember it was hilarious because like I'm the other way. In fact, later on, I was afraid to talk to her or bring it up at all. And she said, you could have asked me any questions. And like, I didn't, because again, it was that fear, I'm going to say the wrong thing and I'm going to ruin it and it's over.
Right.
And so the one other thing I wanted to mention before we got to that point was we did a body image exercise. Now I have body dysmorphia because of my eating disorder. And one of the other reasons like, oh, I'm too fat to date and all that kind of stuff. And I remember we stood in front of the mirror and she said, you be at any level of undress you want, and I'm going to be at it with you too. I said, okay. And it took a long time. Remember, she knew me too well. Right. She would never tell me what we were going to do most of the time. She would just say it on the moment. How do you feel about doing this today? Because she knew I'd obsess and over it. And
overanalyze it and be like,
and overanalyze it and be afraid. When I heard about the body image exercise, I was so terrified. I spent that whole time up until we actually did it, imagining her rejecting me. So I was planning what I was going to say when she said we need to stop working together, because I was so sure, and I was so sure I'd be rejected. Right. Like
if she saw you naked, you would be rejected. If she saw all of you,
or I said something about my body, and she's like, please leave my office, like that.
Right.
And so remember I walked in and she's like, do you want to do the body exercise today? I said, sure. But in my head, I'm like, fuck.
No.
And I was just like so scared. And I remember like, if we're going to do this right, I need to get into my underwear to just show, because it's my stomach is where like, because of I'm overweight. That's where the fear is. And I remember at first I couldn't do it. So we just talked for a bit. So she would talk about her body and talk about my body. She'd point to and she'd lift her shirt and point to her stomach, go, and this and that. And I said, we need to take stuff off because the clothes are in the way.
Right.
So I was just thinking about me and psyching myself up for me. And I had completely forgotten what she had told me. Whatever level of undress you're at, I'm at too. Right?
Yeah.
So I take off my shirt. She takes off her shirt and she's not wearing anything on, above her waist. Mm-hmm. And I just I got really scared and I had to look away. And I said, oh, I didn't know you were going to. And she's so fucking confident and knows. She's just like, oh, sorry. I thought you knew what I was doing. She was perfectly calm. And I'm over here and what it was really realized was it was the first time I'd seen a woman nude that wasn't in porn, like a pornography or art or whatever. And so I associated her with pornography because that was the only time there was an extreme emotion attached to nudity. Right. Was in when looking at. So, and also again, with the I'm a predator programming, oh, she's naked. This is very intimate. I can't be here. This is wrong. I'm hurting her somehow. Right. Or I'm going to stare at her and be creepy about it. Mm-hmm. And I remember it's the cutest thing in the world. I said, can I look? Because I had to ask her permission because she took off her shirt. So obviously that's why we're here. Yeah. But I had to ask and she said, sure. So I looked and it was like the spell had been broken. It was like, oh, we're just two people hanging out. There's nothing to be afraid of. And it was fine. I didn't stare. It wasn't creepy. It wasn't weird. And we talked and she talked about all this stuff. And then she started talking about the insecurity she had around her vulva. Mm-hmm. And I was so moved that she shared that with me. I was overwhelmed because no woman had ever shared something like that with me before. And that gave me permission to share about my, I'll share this on the podcast. One of the other things that was holding me back is the fact that I'm uncircumcised. And in America, that's uncommon. Yes. And I gravitated towards stuff out in the world, usually female comics who would share things about being uncircumcised, men uncircumcised as gross or weird or scary. And so that, I would look for evidence to support that fear and that, right. Even though and I remember her saying, oh, well, yeah, that's not common in the US, but it is in Europe. And my hand was shaking when I told her that. And I'm like, wait, this isn't going to stop me from, this isn't a problem. This is not a barrier to me having sex and I had to sit with that too and be because there's probably somewhere in that fear, there's a relief if it doesn't happen because of the fear of having that experience was so strong, even though there's that deeper human longing to have it. There's also a comfort, at least temporarily, oh, thank God I don't have to have this experience.
Exactly. No, there is always that moment where you're oh, thank God it's not going to happen. I don't have to deal with that because it's the hurdles you're going through to overcome this, overwhelming anxiety within yourself is so debilitating that you're pushing those barriers. So you will try to make blocks everywhere not to do it, but you're doing
find excuses, obsess over things. Yes. I used to obsess. What am I wearing to the session? What clothes should I wear? Should I do my hair like it was a date? I just was because that I could control and that made me feel safe. Just all that kind of stuff where it's really just, you want to look halfway decent and not smell if you're on a date, but just show up and be yourself, and let the rest happen. But it was probably, so that changed me. Before that session, I was even taking my shirt off at the beach. I felt uncomfortable.
Just so you know, a lot of people feel that way, Joe. You're not the only one. So just so you know.
And I realized I was waiting for someone to body shame me. That's why I was so uncomfortable. Yeah. And it took me until that moment to realize it. And now I just go to nudist events and do stuff and looking into nude modeling. And I just don't
get in that. First, you have to tell us, how was it when you guys did?
Yes. So about a month later, she said, so I'm willing to explore sexually with you. And I'm like,
What?
We're gonna do that. She's like, I'm willing. And I'm like, okay. And then I remember like emotion on an intellectual level. Oh, sure. Of course. This is logical. We've worked up to this point.
Right.
Well, on a deeper level, I'm like, this isn't happening.
Right.
And it wasn't until that first time that we got naked together. We got naked and did a little light touching. And then we got naked and did actual like sexual touching, full touching. And I remember, this is happening right now. And like, I'm having, and it felt amazing. And then she stopped. And I was like, oh, right. She's doing slow, gradual. I'm like, can we do that again? She's like, sure. So we did it again. And like, can I touch you? And she's like, sure, go explore. And so I got to touch her, which was just as exciting as being touched and watching. She told me what she wanted and I did what she wanted. And the look on her face and, she made noises and she was enjoying it. And like, oh, she's enjoying something I'm doing. She's enjoying me. That was a real mind-blowing thing for me. To be of service in that way. And the first time we actually had a sex, and it was the funniest thing, we'd talk, we'd hug and kiss at first to meet up, to reconnect. Then we'd chat for a bit. How was your week? Then she'd set up let's practice. She'd set up the bed in the back, the couch would turn to the bed. We'd take off our clothes. We'd set up music. And then we'd we'd cuddle for a little bit. And then we would start kissing and touching and doing foreplay stuff. And then she turned to me and she said, how about a blowjob? It was just like how casual that is after all that buildup of like, would you like a cup of coffee? Like that's, it's just like the best thing. And I remember like, it's like, yes, when you get to that point with someone, that's just how it is.
Yeah.
Like you just ask them.
Yes.
And I remember 3 things happened in succession that were big deals, that big barriers that broke. And I was exhausted after this session emotionally.
Of course.
You can imagine. Was first, she was looking at my penis and touching it. She was seeing it. Because it's that moment of, and I hear a lot of people have this the first time they have sex. Like, is everything normal there? Is it weird? Do they like it? Like, is there, So there was that, and like she's not saying anything, and she's already very much established. If something's wrong, she says it. So we're good. Right. And just being aroused in front of someone, like she can see that I'm excited. Like as a male, we know what that looks like. Yeah. So I'm like, that was very vulnerable to be like, I'm sexually attracted to you. I want to have sex with you, and you can see that I do. Yep. And then, we got the condom on and she started doing her stuff because very protection for everything, because we're first safe. Second, modeling that for me to show me how it's done. Yep. Third, she's polyamorous in her private life, which is a great for her job. It works out very well. So we're doing that and it feels amazing. But what I'm realizing now is like the physical sensations really take a backseat to the emotional intimacy. That's where it's at.
It's so true.
So we're doing that. I remember the joy, an intimate joy that I've never felt before. And then I feel my body tensing up a little, and I'm consciously relaxing myself. Like, relax, you're safe. This is safe, and then fear and depression and anger and sadness started coming up like really intensely. And all these emotions were happening all at once, like everything. I was feeling everything at once. And my brain's like, we're going to dissociate. We're going to shut down. And I said, fuck no, we're not. We're enjoying this experience. So while she's doing her thing, I'm fighting this mental battle of trying to stay present and just holding on and get a little fuzzy around the edges. And I come back in, and fuzzy around the edges and come back in, and calming myself, calming my body, and fighting to stay present and calming my body. And then the wave starts to come. And she had taught me the arousal scale. She said, want you to say, because it's hard to say words when you're in that place, 1 to 10, 9 being orgasm imminent, 10 being it's happening now. So I was become conscious and was just able to squeak out 9, and then it was over. And it was just like, and then the third final barrier, not only did I have an orgasm in the presence of someone else, but we co-created that experience together.
Wow. Wow. That was so beautiful and intense.
It really was.
No, I could see how you would be. You said it was exhausting because it's that emotional battle in your head that you literally had. It was like you were going to war with yourself, going to war with your trauma and everything and getting on the other side of it.
Yeah. And you know what? Like I was so exhausted, and I remember being angry at myself for being sad. Like, you had this amazing experience. Why are you sad? And that anorexic fear I wanted to quit because it was so vulnerable. And everyone was like, I think you value recovery more than you're going to stay in.
Yeah.
And those feelings came up a few more times. I worked through some barriers. I remember when we had intercourse for the first time, it took a month of work to get there.
Yeah.
I was so scared that as soon as we would start intercourse, my erection would disappear immediately. And we tried to figure out what it was. We did a bunch of stuff, and we were like, no, this is mental emotional. Yeah. And when she said that to me, she said, I think you're not ready, I just got really depressed really quickly. And she said, hey, we're going to figure this out. So yeah. And so we worked at that for, I also had some premature ejaculation stuff come up, and I learned some exercises. So I can say to anyone any males out there, you can do Kegels, and that does help with control. Mm-hmm. Men can do Kegels too. I did not know this. But also mental exercises of not getting lost in that pleasure. Because as addicts, we talk about the lows all the time, but we don't talk about the highs. Highs can also make us want to disassociate or numb out and not be present in that. And what's a bigger high than sexual pleasure?
Yeah, you totally want to disassociate from it because it's the overwhelmingness of it all. So I get that. And I'm just like blown away by how much work you have put in to get on the other side of it. It's beautiful.
It was a combination of working my recovery program, mm-hmm. going to my therapist, and then going to her. And we would talk a little bit about my issues, but she's not a trained therapist. She's trained under a therapist.
Yeah.
So I had to figure out who to talk to about what. But I remember that day I woke up one morning and something had shifted in me. My confidence was a lot higher. And I walked into that session and we had intercourse for the first time successfully, meaning arousal, erection, orgasm.
Yeah.
And every time we hit a breakthrough, it was the cutest thing. She'd say, we did it. It was like this verbal high five that she would always do. And we had that moment, and I thought I'd be like crying or having some big emotional moment. I just sat there just overwhelmed with happiness, just with this huge grin on my face. Because there was a period of time where I'm like, oh, maybe intercourse is not something I can have. Like, I just can't have it. And I remember another voice in my head was like, all right, come on, just keep doing your work. Like, don't
psych yourself out. You're right. You're on the road, just, but we get impatient with that growth. We get impatient with the process. And it's like, you have to keep walking. You have to keep one step in front of the other. And that's what you did.
Exactly.
It's like you took the pressure off yourself too, that you got to heal all those things that you were battling with yourself. And then that day comes and you think you're going to have this outburst of feelings, and you just you feel good. You're happy, And
a lot of times those feelings would come up after I processed them later, but
mm-hmm.
not in that big dramatic way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was this very intimate experience, but there also were very strict boundaries. Like, we couldn't communicate outside the sessions unless we were scheduling appointments. Mm-hmm. And we couldn't, we were friends that were practicing. And there was a period in the middle where I went into I'm also identified as a fantasy addict. Yeah. And I went into fantasy, and I thought she was my girlfriend for about 24 hours. And it was horrific. When I came out of that, I even posted a video about it online. It was like, oh my God. And I deleted it.
Yeah.
And I talked to my friends of mine. They said, remember, this is therapy. And that really threw all the water on that fantasy. He really helped me, kill that. And he's like, how do you feel about that? I said, I think I just need to stop. I can't do this. There's no way I can do this. And he said, that sounds like love avoidance. Why don't you just keep showing up, and instead of forget about, let go of what you think you need or want, just let it be what it really needs to be. What you really need. Let that happen.
Mm-hmm. Get out of your own way is what I like to say.
Get out of my own way and learn the difference between not having overblown expectations and trying to force something to happen my way, but also not going the other way in anorexia and not saying what my needs are. Mm-hmm. A little to the left, faster, slower. Can you do that again? I don't like that other thing you did. Can you not do that next time? That kind of stuff. It's my body. And I remember at the beginning, I felt like it was rude of me, or it wasn't my place to tell her how she should touch me. And it took me a while to get comfortable with saying, wait, no, it's my body. I get to decide who touches it and how.
Exactly.
Like, that's my autonomy. I remember like, it was about learning what positive masculinity was. And I remember at one point we were cuddling after and she had her head on my chest. And I remember feeling more masculine somehow from that experience. And I'm like, oh, that's what positive masculinity is. Cause there's not a lot of models out there for that right now.
No.
So yeah, I remember it was just a wonderful thing. And, you know, I do miss it. And there are times where I fall into, I need someone else to make me happy. I needed my therapist to bring me back from that today and help me get back to, she's become part of my visualizations in therapy, which is fine because I'll never see her again. So like, she can be like slightly larger than life and it's not a problem. But yeah, that last time we said goodbye. Oof.
Oh my God. Thank you so much. We could literally talk forever, but we've been talking forever already. But I just want you to, one last thing.
Yes.
Anybody listening out there that is struggling with intimacy, whether they're a virgin or not, what would be your advice for them right now?
There are sex therapists trained in this. I would recommend they go to one. There are resources where you can get therapy online. So you can at least connect to a therapist, whatever their focus is, and get your journey started. Don't wait. Don't put off your life. Go see someone today. There are ways to go on sliding scale if money is a problem. I can give links to what surrogacy is, if that's something that someone feels they need, and along with a website of where the surrogates are. You can't contact them directly. That would not be appropriate. But a therapist can contact the organization and indirectly to talk to people. And so a therapist has to contact and do that for you and agree to it. So it's a therapist, client, and surrogate. It's a triad, and that's how it works.
Oh,
yeah.
We will put all those links in the show notes. So, Joe, thank you so much for sharing your story today. I'm eternally grateful to know you. You
too. It was such a pleasure to come on. And, you know, my hope is that by telling this story, it'll help someone else. And so thank you for giving me that opportunity to be of service.
And if you want to be on the show, please email me at secretlifepodcast@icloud.com. Until next time. Thanks again for listening to the show. Please subscribe, rate, share, or send me a note at secretlifepodcast.com. And if you'd like to check out my book, head over to secretlifenovel.com or Amazon to pick up a copy for yourself or someone you love. Thanks again. See you soon.